Congressman Kiley, we're currently seeing incredible uncertainty in our economy. We're seeing consumer confidence falling. We're seeing the stock market and stock indices declining sharply. There's a very good chance we're headed for another recession. We're seeing threats against and the very sovereignty of our largest trading partner and staunchest ally, Canada, not to mention Greenland, not to mention the Panama Canal. We are seeing the dismantling of the NATO alliance, which has preserved the peace in the Western Hemisphere for over 80 years. And we're seeing the flaunting of court orders and the continuation of illegal acts by the executive branch. I'm wondering, Congressman Kiley, if you're doing anything to stand up against that, or if you think that's okay. That's my question. I'll take the answer on the air. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, sir, for sharing your concerns. I can't say I agree with every characterization that you just made, but I do appreciate the feedback. And I think that there has been some volatility in the market lately, for sure. But when you look at the general tenor of things, there was a survey nationwide done over the weekend about whether folks think that we're on the right track or the wrong track, and it was right track was 20 points higher than it was just a few months ago. So I think there have been a lot of good changes when it comes, for example, to the border. We saw that the number of illegal border crossings was reduced by something like 95% this last February over what it was the previous February, and we all know the devastating impact that this border crisis has had on our state and country when you look at the way that fentanyl has had such a tragic impact on every community throughout our state and throughout our country. And then I think that when you look at the economy, there are some signs of optimism as well. We see that when it comes to key commodities, prices are starting to go down, and we're starting to catalyze new forms of job creation and domestic manufacturing. So I think those are all positive trends, but at the end of the day, I'm fighting for the direction of our country as well as for the direction of our state and of our particular district. And I'm going to continue to be an independent voice for our district. And so just like when Joe Biden was in office, when I found areas where I agreed with him, then I would seek to collaborate. I gave you one example earlier where he signed into law legislation that I sponsored and got through the House, the Lake Tahoe Restoration Act. And in the same vein, I'm going to work with President Trump in the areas where we have agreement and where I think that working together we can do what's best for our district. Where there are areas where I feel like something that's being done is not going to have a positive impact on our district, then I'm going to make that known as well. For example, I recently gave a speech on the floor of the House talking about some of the impacts on fire mitigation projects that we're starting to see that I think are concerning. And so that is what I was elected to do, is to be an independent voice for the folks in our district. And I appreciate you calling in tonight, because even if I don't agree with you on every single issue, it's very helpful for me to know where you stand so that I can better represent our district as a whole.
Congressman, I'm going back to the Forest Service, because in addition to the fire issues, the Forest Service was about 10% of the workforce was let go by DOJ. These forests are where your constituents and the tourists who we all rely on to support local businesses come to hike, fish, hunt, dirt bike, camp, and ski. If the firings proceed, they will affect not just fires, but every aspect of recreation on public land, including maintenance of roads, trails, restrooms, and campsites, the availability of guidance from rangers, and search and rescue capacity. And those who live near public lands will be affected even if they don't use them. Rural areas are particularly vulnerable to both fire and to the economic fallout of lost jobs. How are you planning to protect these jobs and protect our access to these treasured national forests?
Well, thank you very much, and I agree with much of what you said, and that's why from the very beginning of my first term a couple years ago, I made getting additional resources for the Forest Service a very top priority, and we have in fact brought unprecedented resources for forest protection and for all of the different things that you talked about. So I will continue to make sure that we advocate for that. And I don't think there's been any sort of 10% cut. We've been monitoring reports as they come in, and we've been highlighting where we see things happening that are not good for our district and for our forests, where those things happen, so that we can make sure that appropriate changes are made. And then finally, I'll note that I think I mentioned this earlier in the call. We just sent a letter last week about the national park issue in particular, that we really need to get those parks staffed up. And so we're asking for the administration to provide the individual parks direct hire authority so that they can get the resources that they need and the personnel that they need going into these peak seasons. And finally, I'll also mention that just this last week, we passed a bill to fund the government and actually keep the government open. And this ended up being a bipartisan bill. You had some kind of, I guess, maybe extremes on both sides who were against it and wanted to shut the government down. I didn't think that was the responsible thing to do. So I supported bipartisan legislation that ended up also being supported by Chuck Schumer over in the Senate, at least advancing it to a final vote, in order to keep the government open and to keep it funded. And as part of that continuing resolution, there was actually an increase in pay for federal firefighters.
Good evening, Congressman, and thank you for hosting this event. So I'm a federal employee and also a military veteran. And as a military veteran, I often hear politicians voice support for veterans, but that support doesn't always translate into action. Do you plan on taking any actions to protect the jobs of federal employees who are also veterans? And then I have a second part question to that. Recently, Congressman Derek Tran introduced a bill, Protect the Veterans Job Act, in the House of Reps. Do you plan to sponsor this legislation? And if not, why?
I haven't seen it yet. I'd certainly be happy to look at it. I am very much committed to supporting our veterans in every way I can. As I've mentioned on the call before, this has not only been a matter of words, but a matter of insistence in the budget process that while we need to find savings, we cannot do so at the expense of our veterans. And in fact, when we passed the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which is actually going to save taxpayers a couple $1 trillion over the next decade if those spending levels are maintained, we actually increased support for our veterans. But I'll definitely take a look at Mr. Tran's bill. I just haven't had the chance to see it yet.
I wanted to ask you about this because I was watching tonight on the news as there were 2 different tornado warnings in our area that got me really worried about the safety of our communities. And as you know, this is really unprecedented for us and related to climate change, which I'm really worried about with respect to our weather and our water. And the only thing that worries me more about that, I think, is either people who deny, as a scientist, who deny the reality of climate change, and then people who are dismantling our ability to monitor it through NOAA and the National Weather Service, which is actively happening through DOGE. And given the safety of our communities is so tied to the need for effective forecasts, what can you do to ensure that we don't lose the critical services of public services like the National Weather Service?
Well, thanks for the question, and I guess I'm not entirely familiar with what you're referring to, but I do think it's important that the National Weather Service is important, and there's obviously a lot of tools out there for monitoring climate change, and a lot of folks working on this in many different sectors. And I've said I do believe climate change is a factor in some of these extreme weather events, but when it comes to California, we don't have quite as many tornadoes necessarily, but we have these catastrophic fires. But I don't agree with the assessment that climate change is the only factor when it comes to these catastrophic fires. I believe that the way that we've allowed our forests to become overgrown is also a factor, and probably the most significant factor in a lot of cases. I mean, I'll give you one example of this. So I represent Grizzly Flats, which is the community that where hundreds of people lost their homes in the Calder fire, and there was a fire mitigation project that had been delayed that might have stopped that fire from getting out of control if it had gotten done on time. But a project that had gotten done was in the Christmas Valley, which was only completed by then thanks to legislation that allowed for these sort of forest management projects to be expedited in the Tahoe Basin. And because that project had been done, that is, by many assessments, what saved the town of South Lake Tahoe, that and the amazing heroism of our firefighters. So I understand where you're coming from. I think you raised some important points, but I think it's also important to recognize the other factors that are contributing to some of these events.
Okay, first of all, Congressman, thank you so much for your past emphasis on the word past support of Social Security. I've read Project 2025 cover to cover, and I've also read some leaked documents from Social Security administration that show that there is a plan afoot to really cripple Social Security, make it less efficient, cut people from the program, cut phone support, cut offices, and then eventually privatize it. 70 million Americans rely on Social Security, of which I am one. What is your plan to stop this, or do you agree with it? And if you don't agree with it, how are you going to band together with us and help keep this from happening to us?
Well, I appreciate you acknowledging my support for protecting Social Security, and that support has not wavered in the slightest. It is as strong as ever, and as long as I have the privilege to be your representative, I will fight in every way I can to protect those benefits. Indeed, as I mentioned earlier, we not only have protected Social Security in the Fiscal Responsibility Act and the other government funding bills we've actually increased benefits for millions of Americans who I believe were unjustly unfair.
So my question was what you're doing for families with special needs kids like the ones your mom taught. The dismantling of the Department of Education risks losing funding, and the same kids are also on Medicaid, which also looks in danger.
Thanks very much for the question, and there's few things that we do that's more important than helping our kids with special needs. As you mentioned, my mom was a special education teacher for many, many years in our area. I started my career as a high school teacher myself, and I'm honored to have been named earlier this year to chair the House Subcommittee on K-12 education. And so the issue of providing support to kids with special needs is one I've been working on for quite a while. When I was in the legislature, I supported major increases in the amount of money that's available to kids with special needs, and also changes to the funding formula, which oftentimes actually deprives districts that are doing a good job serving families of the resources that they need, and then they have to dip into their general fund, and it's created this big fiscal issue for a lot of our districts. Now, it is true that a good part of special education funding comes from the federal government under IDEA, or the Individual with Disabilities Education Act. And I am going to be very insistent that whatever reforms we make when it comes to education policy, we need to make sure that we are protecting those funds, and indeed, ideally, more of them will actually get to students at school sites where they're being assisted with their IEPs and being given the help that they need. So that's going to be what my focus is on in my leadership of that subcommittee, is making sure that that funding gets to the students where it's actually needed. Thanks for the question.
Hi, Congressman Kiley. I had a question in regards to funding that has been allocated for fire mitigation projects that are in our Tahoe National Forest, and the money that is allocated for these projects has already been approved by Congress. Thank you very much. But now that funding is being held up pending review of language in contracts that are supposedly contain elements of DEI. And so there's a great concern up here, especially in our very fire-prone area, that the money isn't going to get released in time to get these projects done before our fire season starts. What are you doing to make sure that the funds that have been allocated by Congress get released so that these projects can be completed?
Yeah, thank you for that. And this is what I was referring to earlier as well, that I have raised concerns where I've heard from those who are executing these grants in actually several different counties in my district, certainly including Tahoe, about things getting held up. And the point that you make is absolutely valid, that there's a narrow time window in some of these areas that have weather to deal with. And so we need to get those projects moving forward. And so I'm doing everything I can to convey the sense of urgency to the administration. I will say that the overall level of funding that has come in, though, has increased dramatically in recent years when it comes to the funding that we're getting for forest management and fire mitigation projects. And that's allowed us to have more personnel and to do work at a scale that really has not been done before, and that is finally at least approaching the sort of magnitude that we need to really make a meaningful reduction in the risk of catastrophic wildfires in California. And so we've had unprecedented funding coming in. I've advocated for every form of that I can since getting to Congress, and of course I'm going to do everything I can to protect that funding going forward.
I kind of deal in things, in a common sense way, and was wondering if you would support ending subsidies for pharma and oil. I mean, they're they're making record profits right now, and I don't know why, on a common sense level, why are we still subsidizing those fields?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what subsidies you're referring to. When it comes to, for example, gas prices in California, our gas prices are way, way higher than the rest of the country. And the reason for that is that we're taxing our own citizens way more than any other state. And then there's a whole host of other regulations that also make prices at the pump much more expensive here than in other states. It's actually remarkable. You've had gas prices nationwide recently hit a 4-year low, but California is an outlier. California is a notable exception to that trend. Our gas prices are the highest in the country, higher than even Hawaii, and we're paying, I think it's $1.60 more per gallon than the national average. And so I think that that is a huge, huge reason why the cost of living is so high in California as well. Not only are consumers paying that at the pump, but that gets baked into the cost of goods throughout the economy as well. And so we need to change those policies at the state level. In California, I've advocated for reducing the gas tax, among many other regulatory reforms. But more broadly, there is this opportunity right now to change energy policies, not only in California, but nationwide, in a way that will dramatically increase our capacity to generate electricity right here in the United States, rather than having to import it. What does that mean? It means, number one, it's going to be a lot better for the environment. It means, number two, that we're not going to have to be relying on other countries for our energy. But it means, number three, that things are going to get a lot cheaper if we're able to produce our own energy in the United States. And that's going to be part of the legislative package that we have moving forward here as well, is regulatory reform, permitting reform, other types of legislative efforts that will unlock the capacity for energy independence that we have in the United States.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. So first, I want to just highlight a couple of things before my question. One, sanctuary cities do not protect immigrants from criminal prosecution. That's a misrepresentation. And Louisiana, not California, has the highest poverty rate. We're not even in the top 10. My question is, you said you want to work to reduce the deficit, but Trump's tax cuts have greatly increased the deficit. You want to extend them when they largely benefit billionaires, not the working or middle classes are trying to claim. So how can you do something that will increase the deficit by up to $5 trillion when you say you want to reduce it? Please reconcile these things for me.
Sure, thanks very much. Unfortunately, California does have the highest real poverty rate in the country when you factor in cost of living. Anyone, if you're sitting at your computer, you can Google it right now. Just Google California highest poverty rate, and I think that that is a product of some of the overreaching policies that we have in this state, and that I think we're starting to see change. I think that there's a lot of folks, regardless of party affiliation, that understand that maybe we've gone a little too far in one direction in California. Now, as far as the tax measure goes, again, if this expires, it's going to be the biggest tax increase in U.S. history. And so what you're going to see is the standard deduction is going to be cut in half. You're going to see across the board individual rates will increase. You're going to see the child tax credit is going to be cut in half. You're going to see the expensing and research and development tax relief that stimulates economic activity and helps workers and propels economic growth. You're going to see all of that go away as well. And as I mentioned before, I'm going to be fighting to make sure that we get an increase in the SALT deduction cap as well. So what we actually saw when these measures initially went into effect is that it actually has a dynamic effect on the economy. So, of course, number one, it is of great assistance to individuals and families who now have more money, more discretionary income that they can go out and spend. But number two, it actually brought a lot of companies to come back to the United States and to repatriate their tax dollars. So what you saw is this huge influx of money into the federal treasury. So while you're correct that on its face, if you have sort of a typical Congressional Budget Office scoring of tax relief, it's going to say that the initial effect of that is to increase the deficit. The idea is that you're actually going to propel economic activity that's going to increase tax revenue that will ultimately reduce the deficit going forward. And so that's part of the legislative process, is we're figuring out exactly what those effects are going to be, how we can maximize the amount of economic growth, maximize the amount of tax relief for individuals, while also getting the deficit under control and ultimately starting to reduce our national debt, which poses such a grave threat to our country in so many different ways.
Good evening. My question is about the SAVE Act that's been introduced that would require for anyone to register to vote, to need either a passport or a birth certificate that matches their current legal name. So my question on that is, we have 140 million American citizens that do not have a passport. Passports are expensive. They may seem like a trivial purchase for some, but to others, it's a luxury that they can't even afford, even if they could travel. We also have 69 million women in the United States who have taken their spouse's name who do not have a birth certificate that matches their current legal name. If the SAVE Act were to be passed, it would be practically impossible for these people, women, to be able to exercise their right as an American citizen to vote. So what are you doing to protect our right to vote?
I agree with you 100%. That voting is the right of American citizens. But I think it should only be the right of citizens. I think that you should be required to show an ID in order to cast a ballot. I mean, we have to present an ID doing many things, to fly on an airplane, to buy alcohol, a million other things that we do on a daily basis without even thinking about it. And so I think that when it comes to this sacrosanct right that is the foundation of our democracy, casting a ballot, I do think that voter ID is a common sense idea. Most other countries, like almost all of them, have voter ID. It's really the United States or particular states within the United States that is an outlier in this respect. And so the SAVE Act is getting at that idea. I have not heard the particular concern that you raised associated with the SAVE Act. If that is true, then I think obviously it needs to be changed, but I haven't heard that particular issue connected with it. All the SAVE Act is designed to do is make sure that people who vote are legal U.S. citizens and that they can provide proof of identification in order to cast a ballot. I think it's a pretty common sense idea.
Yeah, so up in Truckee, we do a lot of defensible space work near our homes. And obviously, as you've already expressed, Congressman, wildfire mitigation and defensible space is extremely important. However, we've had through DOGE a number of federal funding freezes that are affecting wildfire mitigation projects. And specifically, I have a question about the Alpenglow Sawmill project. Again, this is a business that is a federally funded project that was on the verge of starting work to create it. It's something we vitally need because right now what happens is we clear out, defensible space. We have wood that we cannot get processed. It ends up being, fallow because there's no sawmill in the area. So I would love to hear specifically what you can do and will do to try to bring back these wildfire mitigation projects, specifically the money for the Alpenglow Sawmill project.
Well, if you could, pass on the information you have on that to us. I'm familiar with that project. I agree with you 100%. That's a very important project. We really need to bring sawmills back. It's a huge piece of the puzzle when it comes to effective forest management. And if that is in any way being negatively affected, I will absolutely advocate for it in every way that I can.